Welcome back to the class, and we are continuing our discussion on the very important scholar Ulrich Beck on his theorization on globalization. So, in the previous two classes, yes, we discussed his theorization on the state, on cosmopolitan state, and we found that he has something very interesting arguments to make about the transformations of nation state in a globalized era. And we discussed in two sessions his larger argument about a movement from methodological nationalism to that of methodological cosmopolitanism. And he uses his analysis of the transformation of nation state in a globalized era. So we found that he argues, or he very beautifully he elaborates how the frames of references cannot be contained within the national boundaries, or national boundaries no longer contains the kind of processes or transformations of any of these entities that you want to analyze through the lens of globalization. So we had a very interesting discussion on arguments about nation states, about how its notions of autonomy and sovereignty are getting redefined, and a prospect or the possibility of a new cosmopolitan state emerging. But now we know that those very promising arguments, or very positive, optimistic arguments about the emergence of a cosmopolitan state, it no longer is the case. What we are seeing is a kind of a downturn or a downward trend in the larger arguments about globalization. So now this class, as well as the coming two more sessions, altogether 3 sessions, we are going to discuss one of yet another very important argument made by Ulrich Beck, his theory of the risk society. And maybe we can say that Ulrich Beck is mostly known for this particular argument, that his very strong argument that the contemporary world in which we live must be characterized as a risk society. Okay, so this is a very innovative and very provocative argument, and then he has a series of articles and books written on this theme, and he has been a very important advocate of this particular theme through his writings, through his speeches and lectures and interviews and everything. You will come across quite a lot of Beck's lectures on the YouTube, and I would urge you to listen to them, because all of them are very important and interesting. So this 3 sessions, I am going to take it in a continuous manner. We are discussing the same concept, the risk society, but the discussion is split into 3 sessions in a consecutive manner. So the material for these 2 lectures are taken from these 2 essays. One on the way towards an industrial society of risk, published in International Journal of Political Economy. It was published in 1990. And another one, Living in the World Risk Society, Economy and Society, published in 2006. So these are the 2 articles on which I am basing my lectures, and all the PPTs for the coming classes are directly taken from the text of these 2 lectures. So many times it might appear as if in the first person, but it's Beck's own articles. I'm increasingly getting a feeling that instead of scrolling down the article, this might be helpful for the learners. And at the same time, I strongly urge you to look for these materials, download them, and then read them independently. These lectures are available. They are available on JSTOR and a number of other platforms. So kindly download them, read them maybe a couple of times, and then try to see how a scholar like Ulrich Beck makes very passionate arguments about the risk society. So now, before we commence, or before we start his discussion on the risk society, it is important to know what is its overall argument. Okay, because this term risk is not something that we conventionally come across in the social science language, and risk is again a common English language that we use in our everyday parlance. But here, for Beck and for scholars like even Giddens, risk is understood as the unintended consequences of our march towards modernity. Okay, so this particular theme we have come across earlier. Okay, so for even Giddens argues when he talks about the runaway world, or when he talks about the late modernity, or when others speak about it, late modernity, they all talk about the unintended consequences of the first modernity. Okay, we developed our technology, we developed quite a lot of scientific innovations and technological innovations. We invented a lot of new institutions, new political institutions, economic institutions. So we were all in the march towards modernity with an inherent idea that we will have better control over the nature, and we will be able to provide better and more secure, safer living condition for the humankind. But increasingly we realize that many of the unintended consequences, unforeseen consequences, unintended consequences have come up as the byproducts of this particular modernity, and these byproducts are actually posing serious threats to our own existence. Okay, so he says even in his earlier work of 1986, he described risk society as an inescapable structural condition of advanced industrialization. Okay, so this is the point that we need to keep it in mind. He is not talking about natural calamities. He is not talking about biological kind of calamities or diseases or other thing. But all of them will assume a kind of a different character when you understand as these calamities as taking place in an advanced industrialization. Okay, but they are seen as the inescapable structural condition of advanced industrialization. Okay, a lot of things that we have invented with a particular intention, and we must have been successful in achieving that particular intention. But along with that, we have also created quite a lot of unintended and unwanted consequences. Okay, and the examples that he gives are first and foremost the nuclear threat, radioactivity, the issue of radioactivity. We know that how the world is on the verge of a nuclear war, or the whole possibility of a nuclear reactor getting damaged and then leaking the radioactive material is always a possibility. Okay, and a host of other arguments about say increasing pollution level, increasing damage and destruction of the ecology, the rising temperatures, or the kind of a rampant adulteration of food, or a host of other financial frauds and a host of other things which are our own byproducts, our own products, are actually have emerged as a very important factor that now we are supposed to encounter with. Okay, so he begins this essay, especially the first essay published in 2000. Published in this particular essay on the way towards an industrial society of risk. In this work, he says that he's kind of quite dissatisfied with the tendency to prefix post in social theory, because you know that after structuralism, most of the theories that emerge, say whether it's that of Foucault or a number of other people, it's all seen as post-modernity or post-modernity, post-industrialism, such kind of societies. And then he argues that it's a very lazy, it indicates a kind of a laziness among social scientists, because they are not really able to characterize certain things. They are not really able to name a particular phenomenon more categorically, more clearly. That is why they are using this particular term post. So for example, when we say that it's a post-modern, it only says that it's gone past the era of modern or modernity, but it leaves it unclear what exactly is replacing the modernity. Okay, so he says that my central thesis is as follows: in the advanced modern world, the social production of wealth systematically goes hand in hand with the social production of risk. Okay, so in the advanced modern world, the social production of wealth systematically goes hand in hand with the social production of risk. Accordingly, the problems and conflicts of distribution in a society of shortage are overlaid by problems and conflicts that arise from the production, definition and distribution of scientifically and technologically produced risk. He makes a very interesting comparison between the production, distribution and the implication of wealth in a society, and the production, distribution and various implications of risk. We know that in capitalist societies, wealth is produced, and how is wealth produced, who are the people involved in it, and how is wealth distributed differently, how the concentration of wealth among certain people and the lack of wealth in certain other people, how these things have significant impact on the living conditions of people. So all these are have given to quite a lot of interesting discussions. So he's making a parallel between this production of wealth and the production of risk. So now let's see, how can the risk and hazards that are systematically produced as part of the advanced process of modernization be prevented, rendered innocuous, dramatized, channeled, and in those cases where they have actually materialized in the form of latent side effects, be so contained and dispersed to the winds that they neither hinder the process of modernization nor overstep the limits of what may be reasonably accepted, ecologically, medically, psychologically, or socially. So he says that it's a very interesting argument. He says that you can't really stop the production of risk. Okay, you can't really stop the creation of unintended negative or detrimental consequences to humanity, because though we may not want all these unnecessary side effects. Okay, for example, we may not want the threat of radioactivity. We may not want the threat of increasing pollution level. We may not want the threat of, say, rampant adulteration in food or in a number of other things. But these things are a reality. You can't run away with that. They are emerging as a reality in the advanced world. So once if that is a reality, now the whole emphasis of the intellectual class, the scientific community, the government, the technocrats, the policymakers, everybody, it turns towards the whole question of dealing with this particular kind of a risk, because stopping this risk from emerging is absolutely impossible. Okay, because they have come already and we keep producing them. And n number of examples. We know that there are quite a lot of discussions and debates about the consequences of our green revolution. Okay, especially in states like Punjab and Haryana, the huge advancements that happened in 1960s in terms of production of wheat and rice. But now we realize that a sudden spurt in the production of wheat and rice, it also came with a huge cost in terms of ecological degradation, number of rampant cases of cancer among the people, and a host of similar kind of examples can be seen from across the world. So now the whole question is, okay, how a risk and hazard that are systematically produced as part of the advanced process of modernization be prevented, rendered innocuous, okay, so that they don't look at as threatening, and dramatized. Sometimes you may have to dramatize, so certain people may have to dramatize the negative consequences, especially many of these activist groups, they may have to dramatize, channeled, and in those cases where they have actually materialized in the form of latent side effects, okay, in the form of very specific side effects, as in the case of increasing diseases or number of other things, be so contained and dispersed to the winds that they neither hinder the process of modernization nor overstep the limits of what may be reasonably accepted, ecologically, medically, psychologically, and socially. So how do we deal with them? How do we manage these side effects? How do we kind of deal with them? How do we learn to live with them? Okay, how do we make them innocuous? How do we make them appear less threatening or less dangerous? So he says that there is a whole establishment that has come into existence in the advanced late modernity to simply to deal with this. Now he further proceeds by talking about 5 theses that he wants to point out, the risk of modernization, 5 theses. The first thesis is a very important one. He says the dependence of risk on knowledge, and this is a very interesting argument. He says that risks are byproducts of modernization. Okay, I hope this point is very clear. We are not talking about natural calamities. We are not talking about biological big diseases or epidemics like that, but we are talking about the byproducts of modernization. Okay, the things that we ourselves has created, ecological disaster. I gave you the whole lot of examples, and Beck specifically speaks about that. Risks are byproducts of modernization and occur in a surfeit worth preventing. Okay, they must be either eliminated or disavowed or reinterpreted. risks remain largely invisible and their existence is conveyed basically through argument. We know that, in all these cases, whether the farmers of Punjab or Haryana, did they face, higher levels of diseases, or is there a disproportionately higher incidences of cancer among these people? Or is there a high amount of radioactive diseases caused by radioactivity among the people who are residing near to the nuclear reactors in India or abroad? Or what exactly are the consequences of a disaster like Chernobyl or in Fukushima in Japan? Okay, so these kind of questions, we know that these are all the perfect examples of risk. But how does an ordinary person understand that? Or how do ordinary people make sense of that? Okay, so they must be either eliminated, disavowed, or interpreted. Risks remain largely invisible and their existence is conveyed basically through an argument. What impairs health and destroys nature is often not perceptible to one's own senses and eyes. We know that the whole idea about global warming, it's simply beyond our perception, okay, immediate perception, or the destruction of ozone layer because of CFC or number of other things. We don't know. We can't really see that. So consequences of quite a lot of advanced medicines or any such kind of interventions leave behind a series of side effects. So what impairs health and destroys nature is often not perceptible to one's own senses and eyes. Even where it seems to be obvious, it must be socially constructed after it has been objectively determined by an authoritative expert judgment. Okay, so this authoritative, so it has to be objectively established through the authoritative expert judgment. So who is this authoritative expert judgment? And most often these authoritative expert judgments is given by the scientific community or the technocrats or the people, the expert people who come and then study a group of people and then say that, okay, this people are suffering from high incidences of cancer and that has a causal link, or that is produced by this high level of toxins that are found in the air or in the soil or in the water, and that is related to the effluents coming from a particular industry. Okay, so if that has to be established, even when people are suffering in their own life, if people can see their own neighbors or their own family members are suffering from the diseases like cancer or other thing, it has to be established only with the help of an authoritative expert judgment. And a number of examples: radioactivity, food adulteration, pollution, and all these examples that we mentioned. Okay, so common people lose their competence to judge matters concerning their own involvement, and there is a most important point. As I told you, as I mentioned, common people are the ones who are actually at the receiving end. Yet they will not be in a position to establish it scientific manner. They have to depend upon somebody else. They lose an essential bit of their sovereignty of knowledge, and this is very much different from the more traditional ways of their existence, where they know what is happening around their locality and they have their traditional knowledge to deal with that. But here it is simply out of question. What threatens them at the same time makes them dependent on the outside knowledge of other people and hence on the norms, interests and mistakes latent in that knowledge. Okay, so we know that the whole entire scientific establishment and the entire scientific procedure to pronounce certain thing as objective or as truth is heavily problematic, because science is often depending upon a host of new frameworks and new evidences, new procedures, which can really come up with quite a lot of different or competing kind of an arguments and evidences. And there could be hardly a consensus even among the scientists themselves with respect to even the case like high incidences of cancer in some districts in Punjab, or there was a major disaster in Kerala associated with the spraying of endosulfan, a very potent pesticides in a cashew plantation. So the opinion among the scientists are different. The scientists who really support the government says that it has nothing to do with, there are quite a lot of people, patients with deformities and very rare kind of diseases, and a host of people, including environmental activists and politicians, argue that this is a direct side effect of the aerial spraying of endosulfan in those cashew plantations. But whereas the scientists supporting the government establishment, they completely deny that. They say that there is no evidence to suggest. So they have to depend upon the same interest, mistakes and latent in that knowledge. Accordingly, in risk situation, the things of daily life can be transformed overnight into Trojan horses, out of which the risk experts come storming, and through disputing among themselves proclaim what one needs fear and one does not fear. So the ordinary people, are left at the mercy of these people who claim to have this kind of expertise knowledge. These knowledge about risk also at the same time decisions about the state of being affected, about the scope and the type of risk, the substance of threat, the group of persons affected, the long-term consequences, measures to taken, persons responsible and claims for compensation, hence much larger implications. So this is another very important point. Now, these experts who come out of certain research labs or certain institutions and then say and then claim to be having expertise knowledge, okay, they have a much larger responsibility before them to address a host of much larger issues. Okay, they can't simply say that okay, this is because of that or this is not because of that. Even when they say that okay, this higher level of diseases is mainly because of this particular pollution, then it does not simply end with that. Okay, it brings in a host of other questions which are clearly outside the purview of these technocratic experts. Okay, because these are mostly social questions, these are actually political questions, these are questions associated with ethics and then philosophy and a host of other issues. For example, the scope and type of the risk, the substance of the threat, what exactly, the group of persons affected, the long-term consequences. Many times even the experts will not have any idea on that. The measures to be taken, persons responsible. Obviously, it's again a very fraught question. Who exactly are the people responsible for that? How do you fix responsibility in the case of such a disaster? And claims for compensation. It's even more. We know the whole case of Bhopal tragedy, Union Carbide tragedy, where almost 1,000 to 2,000 people were killed. So, what happened to compensation, whom to blame, and how much should be the compensation? They are all, simply beyond the purview of these experts who come from this kind of institutions. The second thesis is the risk attendant on modernization burst asunder the class schema. So, burst asunder means it completely disrupts. It completely disrupts and the boundaries are disrupted and other things. So, social differences and social boundaries are made relative as the risk attendant on modernization, that is endangerment of nature, health, nutrition, etc. spread. So, the social differences and social boundaries, whether based on your gender or caste or class, they have a more, these risks have a kind of more universalizing character. They don't really care for all these social distinctions, and then it can affect all people irrespective of their caste and class position. Whether it's about pollution in Delhi or in the rising tidal level or rising sea level in Mumbai. So all these things have the ability, have the potential to affect everybody equally. It has the ability to burst asunder the class schema. Risks objectively have an equalizing effect in respect to the range and degree of people's exposure. This in fact is what gives them their novel political force. In this sense, risk societies are not class societies. Their risk situation cannot be understood as class situation, nor their conflicts as class conflict. So throughout the essay, he makes a kind of a parallel analysis with the Marxian notion of class association. But here he argues that the risk is equally applicable to everybody. But at the same time, we know that, or he himself acknowledges that the way in which different people deal with risk could be different. Okay, obviously the people from the upper class, they are far better equipped to deal with the consequences of risk. So he is making a distinction between the threat of risk and facing the consequences. Whether it is pollution or radioactivity, the people from the upper sections or upper classes will be far better equipped to protect themselves. New social inequalities on a world scale. The proletariat of the world society of risk live beneath the chimneys and alongside the refineries and chemical plants in the industrial centers of the third world. Okay. The proletariat of the world society of risk, it's not the kind of a conventional proletariat that you see in the industrial societies. Now that is changed. The poisonous gas accident in Bhopal, India brought this to the awareness of the world public. Risk industries have been resettled in countries with cheap labor. This is no accident. There exists a systematic force of attraction between extreme poverty and extreme risk. And I don't think that we require further elaboration on that. We see how toxic wastes is exported to third world countries, and very hazardous industries like shipbreaking industries are concentrated in South Asia in 2 or 3 countries, especially in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, or a host of extremely toxic or poisonous or hazardous industries are located in these kind of places. And Bhopal gas tragedy was one of the major examples that Ulrich Beck highlights. The leaking of this methyl isocyanate, that particular MIC gas, that was extremely poisonous. It was not kept properly, and that got leaked in the middle of the night, killing thousands of people. So he argues that there's a major difference between the exposure to risk and to that of your income level, and then people from the lower classes are expected to or are more exposed to this kind of stuff. Now, societies of risk are not class societies, and that is an understatement. They contain a developmental dynamics that burst asunder all boundaries, driving humanity together in a uniform situation of the self-imposed risks of civilization. The driving force in class society can be summed up in one phrase: I am hungry. Conversely, the movement set off by the society of risk may be expressed in the statement I am afraid. You know that's a very interesting way of putting it. The class society, okay, the society in which Marx theorized about, society in which capitalism emerged, a society in which you could make this distinction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Okay, this society was characterized by one phrase that I am hungry. Okay, I am hungry because there was lack of resources for everybody. Poverty was rampant, and there was major social inequality in everything. And conversely, the movement set off by the society of risk may be expressed in the statement I am afraid. If you look into that, we know even when we take food regularly, from whether it is a fast food or whether it is a packaged food, there is a certain amount of concern in among all of us about the ingredients that are added to that. When we eat, say for example, chicken, there has been quite a lot of concerns about the antibiotics that's being fed to this poultry. There are reports that in India, even one of the most advanced, that the last line of antibiotics is being given to this poultry, to these birds, in order to for them to develop the immunity. But then that will have very serious consequences on the people who consume, and not only people who consume, but even to the people who do not consume non-vegetarian food or meat or chicken, because the viruses they get their immunity against these antibiotics naturally, and everybody is at a much greater risk. So everyone, whether you are a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian, whether however you live your personal life, you are at the risk. You are staring at a risk. Whether all these issues of radioactivity, or there are a lot of concern about radioactivity that can be caused from the mobile phone. We don't know what exactly it is true. Or there is a lot of concern about when 5G comes into picture. Very high intensity radioactive signals must be prevalent for the 5G to operate. So what would be the implication of that on human body? Nobody knows. So in a such a situation, that I am afraid is the most important term. A community of need is replaced by a community of anxiety. In this respect, the risk society typifies a social epoch in which solidarity emerges out of anxiety and becomes a political force. But it is still unclear how this binding force of anxiety works. So he says there is a common level of anxiety among everyone, and this anxiety was never felt maybe a generation, maybe some 40 or 50 years back. They simply did not have this kind of anxiety about these unintended consequences. Okay, so this is his initial argument of that paper that we are discussing, and we'll take a break and we'll meet in the next session. Thank you.